He believed he was invisible. For nearly 3 decades, a man stalked the quiet streets of Wichita, watching families through their windows, memorizing routines, waiting for moments of absolute control. He tied knots with ceremonial precision. He wrote poems about murder, and after each killing, he vanished back into ordinary life, church-going, Cub Scout leading, compliance officer, certain that his intelligence had outwitted everyone who hunted him, until one small square of plastic told the truth. The man the world would come to know as Dennis Rader called himself BTK, Bind, Torture, Kill. The name wasn't coined by police or media. He invented it himself, crafting a persona that fed his ego and extended his terror far beyond the crime scenes. BTK wasn't just a murderer. He wanted to be remembered. In January 1974, the Otero family was found brutally murdered in their home. Parents, children, bound and killed in a manner so cold and methodical that investigators immediately suspected a serial offender. Wichita, Kansas, a city accustomed to quiet predictability, recoiled in shock. There was no forced entry, no theft, only silence broken by violence. Months later, a letter arrived at a local newspaper. The writer described the murders in unsettling detail, details only the killer could know. He mocked police for their incompetence and signed off with a chilling promise. This was only the beginning. The fear no longer belonged just to investigators. It belonged to everyone who opened their front door at night. Over the next few years, BTK killed again and again. He stalked his victims for weeks or months, sometimes photographing them secretly. He fantasized, planned, rehearsed. Then, when the moment felt right, he struck, often in broad daylight, often with terrifying calm. Each murder was followed by silence, broken eventually by another taunting letter or poem mailed to the press or police. What made BTK especially frightening wasn't just the brutality, it was the waiting. Years could pass between killings. Residents of Wichita never knew if the terror was over or merely dormant, and that uncertainty gnawed at the city. Then suddenly, in 1991, BTK stopped. No explanations, no goodbye, just silence. Investigators wondered if he had died, moved away, or been imprisoned for another crime. Some hoped the nightmare was finally over. Others feared the worst, that he was still watching, still waiting. They were closer to the truth than they realized. Behind the scenes, Dennis Rader had not changed. He simply adapted. He married, raised children, became president of his church council. He worked as a compliance officer, ironically enforcing rules and regulations on others, writing citations, demanding obedience. The same craving for control that fueled his crimes now hid behind a badge and clipboard. Inside his home, he kept souvenirs of his murders, tokens of domination. He wrote more poems. He relived the killings in his mind, but he didn't act. Until 2004. After more than a decade of silence, Wichita received another letter. BTK was back. The city froze all over again. Younger officers who had only heard stories now found themselves living inside them. Older investigators felt a familiar dread return to their bones. BTK taunted police with old memories and new threats, furious that time had passed without his recognition. And then he made a mistake, one driven by arrogance. In his letters, BTK began asking police questions, not rhetorical taunts, but genuine inquiries. One question stood out. "Can I communicate with floppy disk and not be traced?" Investigators stared at the page in disbelief. They decided to answer. Through a carefully controlled newspaper ad, police told BTK what he wanted to hear. Yes, they said. A floppy disk would be safe. BTK trusted them. When a purple floppy disk arrived, investigators rushed it to forensic specialists. What they found wasn't a confession, but it was something far more valuable. Metadata. Hidden within the file was information BTK didn't know existed. The disk had been created on a computer registered to Dennis. It listed a church name, a location, a trail. police zeroed in on a man they had never seriously suspected, Dennis Rader, a middle-aged compliance officer who lived quietly, attended church regularly, and blended perfectly into the background. They followed him. They collected DNA from discarded items, and then they compared it to evidence preserved for decades. It was a match. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was arrested while driving to work. He showed no resistance. At the station, confronted with the evidence, he asked a single, almost childlike question. "Why did you lie to me about the floppy disk?" The reign of terror had ended not with a chase, not with a gunshot, but with a lie and a piece of obsolete technology. In court, Rader did something few expected. He confessed, in chilling detail. He described each murder calmly, sometimes correcting prosecutors on minor details, as if recounting a hobby rather than a series of human lives destroyed. Families sat in the courtroom listening to the man who had shattered their worlds speak without remorse. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms. Today, Dennis Rader sits alone in a cell, stripped of the control he craved, his name synonymous with cruelty and hubris. The man who believed himself smarter than everyone else was undone by the very thing that sustained him, his need to be acknowledged. The floppy disk didn't just carry data. It carried the weight of his ego. And it proved a truth that echoes through criminal history again and again. Monsters don't fall because they are hunted forever. They fall because, eventually, they want to be seen.